and welcome back to the Daring to Dad podcast, where we're having conversations at the intersections of fatherhood, masculinity, and faith. I'm excited about today's conversation as our guest is someone who's been really at the forefront of conversations about masculinity, fatherhood, and the evolving role of men in our culture. Ludo Gabriele is a thought leader, writer, and advocate who has spent years exploring the intersections of identity, gender, personal growth. In this episode, we unpack Ludo's journey, how fatherhood changed his perspective, what led him to question and reshape his beliefs, and why he believes that growth means allowing ourselves the freedom to change. We also discuss challenges facing men today, from online discourse to societal expectations, and how we can foster healthier conversations that bring people together instead of driving them apart. This is raw, insightful, and a powerful discussion that I think will resonate with so many of you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Ludo, thanks for joining the Daring to Dad podcast. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. I'm so glad we're making it happen.
Yes, I'm very glad to, Ryan. It's very good to be with you this morning.
Yeah, we go back like quite a ways now that I'm thinking about it. You know, I mean, pre-pandemic for sure. When I first started kind of getting online, talking about issues around masculinity in particular, you were one of like the first people I found that was out there talking about this stuff in a really public way. And I'm wondering if, just for people to get to know you, just to start out, maybe talk a little bit about your journey here and what's brought you to talking about like men and the issues facing men.
Well, thank you for the question. It's been a journey for sure. I want to say it happened almost by accident. Back in 2014, I was 31 years old. I was the father of my son already, who was 2.5 years old. And on paper, I had everything, married, having a kid, owning a house, having a decent job. But I found myself extremely unfulfilled, maybe even depressed, even though I didn't know that this was the case at the time. But it was just this sense of emptiness that really were extremely overwhelming. I was really questioning where that feeling came from, right? And then one of the answers that I found was that I missed a very important part of my son's life, like his first steps, namely. And I felt this longing of connecting with him on a different level than what I was doing. So to make a long story short, I quit my corporate job at that time, which from where I'm from, both socially and what I believe in, you do not do that when you do not have something in front of you. And believe it or not, the hardest thing that I had to do to make the decision was to tell my father. So once he was very supportive of it, I felt very comfortable doing so. So I'm telling that story always because this is, to me, a pivotal moment where I spent time with my son in a way that I never thought would be either possible or allowed, and my heart opened really moment. Yeah. I think this is when I really embraced a part of myself that was there, but I was hidden for 30 years, essentially. Mm-hmm. And the first 2-3 months were awesome. Like, I bonded with him, we played, I took him outside, like, we spent a lot of time together. But extremely quickly, there was a lot of anxiety and things that were creeping in, which was essentially this: what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, are you one of those guys now that stays home, that do not make an income? Like, what does that make you? And it kind of led me into this rabbit hole of introspection, because I lost at that moment for the first time complete sense of self and identity. So I started to read and document myself, understanding if I was the only one that was going through this,
Right,
because
right, right.
it's not necessarily something that we talk about, right? And then I started to get acquainted with literature and authors and activists that I was very foreign from my worldview. Some Bell Hooks, Mark Green, Tony
Mm,
Porter, all of those
mm,
people kind of enriched my view of the world, let's just say. And then fast forward 2 years into that introspection, I became a dad. I knew I was going to become a dad from a daughter this time. And it became very important to start sharing what I've learned along the way.
mhm.
So I started this blog, wokedaddy.com, right before the Me Too movement. And in end of 2016, there were not a lot of guys talking about this, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
But the platform went popular very quickly. After 5 blog posts, I was interviewed by Vice.
Mhm.
As a result of that, I received a lot of hate from many sides of the conversation, death threats from the alt-right. Like it kind of put me on the map, but it was extremely difficult to experience. And from that moment on, I knew that there was something that I had to do with that work. So I continued working on it. I continued publishing content. Um, and I use my platform not only to share my views, but also highlight people in the space that were doing also that type of work, because nobody was giving light and visibility to those people. So that's how I kind of got started.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a story that is so powerful, but, and that I hear so often about how fatherhood kind of is this catalyst towards, huge, change in the life of a man. Your son enters the world and you're like, whoa, okay, this is really stirring the pot internally for you, and we start making these decisions. We start looking into our own lives, and it's this catalyst for huge change and growth. And it can be also radically disruptive, as it sounds like for you. Like,
Yeah.
fatherhood kind of kickstarted this whole new journey out of like a profession, and then, oh my gosh, okay, now that I'm separated from that, like, who am I? And trying to find this kind of new purpose. And it sounds like you found that in talking about issues surrounding men, masculinity, you know, personally, culturally. And I remember finding, wokedaddy.com and seeing what you were doing. And it was one of the things for me that really resonated early on in my journey. And I know that we were both probably coming from certain perspectives, and maybe leaving certain perspectives and embracing new ideas and concepts around like masculinity. And I remember you telling me this at the time, like you receiving some of this online like hate, right? Like, you're talking about men, you're talking about masculinity. What about what you were saying was driving such, vitriol online? Like, what kind of stuff were you putting out there that you felt was getting such a explosive response?
Well, you know, I think context is also important. Fast, if we look back at that time, it was around the time where Donald Trump became president.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time, which was like a shock to a lot of people,
Yeah.
right?
Really highly politically charged like moment
Yes,
in time. Right. Mm.
extremely polarized. So that context, right before the Me Too movement, I think it was already like kind of burgeoning, was
Mhm.
bubbling. So I think two things. Number one, the things that I've wrote in 2017, I would not write again today, because I was in a stage of my journey which was both not as mature, but also extremely reactive. Because when you come across information that makes you question and analyze the blind spot that you had, and as a consequence, how you may have hurt people in your life,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that you want to do is repair, right?
Right.
And then, because there is not a lot of people talking about this, you try to find your voice. And some of the things that I've used, some of the terminology that I've used, I used to, call myself a feminist at that time, which is not the case anymore. But when I did that, it triggered a lot of shit to a lot
Mm-hmm.
of,
Yeah.
and it also triggered a lot of shit to a lot of women who were
Mm-hmm.
saying, look at this guy trying to rub the spotlight, and just because he came to an awakening, right?
Right.
So there was just a lot of hate on both sides, which was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because, again, I think if I wouldn't have done this and if it wouldn't have happened, I don't think we will be talking right now.
Right.
I think it
Yeah.
just started something that were extremely important at that time, which was I essentially invited men to look into the experiences of women and girls in their lives and beyond before
Mm-hmm.
the Me Too movement started.
Yeah.
So because I did that, I think I opened a conversation that was not necessarily ready to be received at that moment, because we can see that fast forward 2024, we're still talking about this, right?
Yeah.
But I also rubbed some people the wrong way because ideology is a powerful
Mm-hmm.
energy, and when people are either questioning their worldview, or when they see that there is a voice or a person that does not necessarily represent what they believe should be saying those things, it just triggers a lot of things to different people.
Right. Yeah. And whenever you're someone who, you know, is no matter what the scale of like your public space, right? So whatever like you're following, whatever, podcasting, whatever, pick your medium. No matter how big or small your audience, people who process kind of publicly, right? That it um we're learning and growing and evolving. And it sounds like, you're at this place where and I've been there too, where, oh my gosh, okay, I'm having these experiences. I'm beginning to share these experiences, share my perspectives as they're unfolding. And um I think a real important thing that I haven't probably always been patient with myself about, or others, is that like, hopefully we all grow and expand. I mean, I love what you said about like, hey, what I wrote in 2017, I would not write now. Like, I feel the same way. Like, I look back on a lot of stuff that I wrote and said early on, like, putting on Instagram, like, or in these little quotation marks. I've looked back and been like, ugh, like, I don't know if I would share that same perspective now, because my life experiences have changed. I have matured. Like, I've interacted with different kinds of people and had those experiences. And as we should, right? We should grow and evolve and expand as people. So I love what you're saying. Like, hey, I was having these experiences, sharing, and I'm this growing and evolving person, and you've continued that journey on. So I think that that's a beautiful thing, and something that uh we all could really learn from, is this idea that we have to change and learn and grow. Um, so man, that's a beautiful thing.
I have to say, one of the first time I came into your awareness,
Mm-hmm.
there is something on your website, your personal website, which says in the bio, like, just so you know, I'm going to change, or something like that.
Oh
You
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And that is exactly what this is. I think what life teaches you, at least what it taught me, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, is that we don't know many things. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know anything, actually.
Yeah.
So as soon as you embrace humility as a key
Mm-hmm.
leadership trait, as early as possible. I think that's when you start growing, when you realize that there is so much more power to say, I'm sorry and I was wrong than I told you so.
Mm-hmm.
When you make that switch, when you let go of the need to be right at all time, you no longer fight
Right.
people.
Yeah.
You just try to take in what is in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
um, and try to understand why those people are saying those things. Why are those people having a different experience?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they, from what place are they talking right now? Are they talking from a place of hurt? Are they talking from a place of trauma? Are you talking from a place of, and up until you don't give that grace to yourself of being wrong, admitting that you've been wrong, you cannot allow that for other
Mm-hmm.
people. You need to
Yeah.
give that to yourself first, that compassion and that acceptance that
Mm-hmm.
you've made mistakes, especially if you've said things publicly that you will not say again.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is critical to allow people to change their views, and it starts with us, right?
Right. And it's hard to do that because we're so tied to our ideas, and even like we're tied to the person who we got the ideas from. Like we, I know that for me, and I've been through this one. Maybe someone that I follow, an author I read, or someone who I've really, I'm like, oh, I'm a follower of this person or this
Yeah.
person's ideas, whatever, politics, like social, whatever, and then they change. There's kind of this like, oh crap, like
Yes.
what does that mean for me now, right? But
Yep.
it's so powerful, and also what I love about what you're saying is that I don't think it's often about like getting it right the first time, because like we're not perfect people, right? The saying the right thing, like okay, we said this thing, we did this project, or like talk about like politics, like oh, we implemented a certain like policy, right? Whether it's in the government or workplace, whatever, that didn't have the impact that we thought it would,
Mhm.
or that maybe had negative impact. I think it isn't so much about did get the right thing the first time, but it's about once we learned about the mistake we made, once we learned about our misstep, it's that moment that I think is the most important. Do we Are we able to admit, you know what? I don't think that was the right move, and I think I'm gonna be brave enough to evaluate, to say, hey, I was wrong about this. Or, you know what, this maybe had some things about it that were true, but I think I might say it differently now. I think that's uh, maybe the real key move. It's not about like, oh, did you get it right the very first time you did it or tried it or said it? It's what did you do once you got more information about it? How did you change? Or did you plant your heels in the ground and stick to it and then never admit you're wrong? Or were you able to adjust? And I think that's um a real quality of leadership
Yeah. And
from anyone, but men in particular.
well, I mean, what you describe is, it roots from like the ability to do what you just described is, first of all, humility.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be humble enough to say, to to accept the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you've been wrong. But I
Right.
think, and you said that it's the most important part. What I would argue also that what is very important is at the very beginning when you say what you say,
Mm-hmm.
like being honest to know from what place this
Mm-hmm.
is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Are you coming from a place of integrity? Are you coming from a place of wanting to be liked? Are you
Mm-hmm.
coming from a place of wanting to connect? Are you looking from a place of whatever that is?
Yeah.
So I think the starting point also is equally important, because if you make a mistake from a place of integrity, it's gonna be much easier to pivot and say, all right, I did my best and I
Mm-hmm.
was wrong.
Right.
If you start from a place of ego or from manipulation or whatever that is, and then you have to pivot, I want to argue that this is not the same process,
Right.
and this it will be much more challenging
Mhm.
to accept that you were wrong, especially if you knew that your intention were not necessarily
Mhm.
well intentioned from the beginning.
Right. And I think that I would say that one thing I've learned as I've gotten older is to wait longer. If something happens to me and I have a feeling, a thought, an experience, is to let it bake, leave it in the oven like a little longer. I think I early on when I was here talking about things, the minute that I experienced it, it was like it was in and out, boom. Just I was putting things out there, and I think part of it was me and ego, as you said, definitely. I also think that often the system of like content creation is like demanding that you churn out stuff so often. And the internet is full of like, I feel like a lot of unformed, unprocessed, unlived like experiences that we're putting out there. And I was definitely guilty of that. And I think life has taught me to let it simmer, let it sit, let it really integrate like into your life and speak from a place of wisdom versus just as you described, ego and to try to, you know, make something for the internet.
Yeah, because people, first of all, people feel it.
Yeah.
I think, and I think also there is just like there are cycles in the seasons and the universe and things like that. There are time to speak and there are time to listen. So I would tell you this: from 2017 to 2020, I was extremely prolific. I
Mm.
wrote and created so much. I felt that at one point that I had to stop because there were so many things in my awareness that made me question my core belief,
Mm.
that I was like, you have to stop and you have to listen for a while, which is what I did. So what I did is the same thing I did from 2015 to 2016, but from 2020 to almost 2024, I stopped creating publicly and I listened to spaces, to people in spaces that were extremely foreign to me from a belief, value perspective. And I did that for a long time. And I said I did that quietly. And I have to tell you, and I did that for two reasons. One, because as I was saying, I felt empty at some point. I didn't have anything of substance to say. That's what I felt. But also I started to be able to predict the next sentence or the next word that were coming out of the mouth of someone that I was watching through the outlets, through the
Yeah.
people that I was following. And I was like, bro, you stuck in a very dangerous echo chamber. For sure,
Yeah.
you're missing something.
Huh. Yeah.
So that's what I did. I listened to people and views and that were very different from me. And when I did that long enough, I took what resonated, left the rest. I also did the same thing with my things that I was
Yeah.
believing even 10 years ago.
Right.
And I think I came from a place, as you were saying, of integration where I come up with my own voice, my own experiences, and I do not care if people like it. And I
Mm.
think that's a powerful place to be. It's a painful place to be as well. But when you know who you are and when you own your words, regardless of what they cost you, I think to me, regardless of if there is a financial outcome tied to it, this is a place of success.
Yeah. Tell me about some things that have changed in you. Like what you talk about making some shifts and oh, I wouldn't say the same thing I did in 2017. I mean, is some of that just natural growth? I mean, what are some big things and ideas that have shifted and changed for you over the course of the last couple of years?
So I think there are two things. One is just listening to your internal voice and being truly honest with yourself and saying, do I really believe that? Or am I really believing what I am saying or what I've been saying? Because holding on to something that you've said in the past, especially publicly, it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do. So once you start this process of examination and also introspection, I started therapy 2 years ago because there is a lot of things that I wanted to address internally that were left unaddressed for a long time. And when you go within, if you're brave enough to do it, you will start to find yourself. Why do you act in the way that you act? Why do you believe the things that you believe? And one of the takeaway that I had, a personal one, was that throughout my life, for different reasons and in different avenues and scenarios, I always tried to find the validation of women. Okay. And when I went to the root causes of that, I was like, all right, now that I understand this, why do I truly believe? Why do I truly believe? And one of the things that I started to, one of the most critical piece of information that came to light was making the difference between what is masculinity and what is men. Because we tend to really join the two. A lot of the masculinity-driven discourse is misunderstood. We make a lot of assumptions and a lot of misconnection. And when I started to really understand that, yes, there is a social and cultural component to masculinity, but there is also a very deeply grounded biological component to it, and that one cannot exist without the other, then I started to really integrate that wisdom of, all right, a man is this biologically, and it informs the way we are conducing ourselves in the world. The biology informs who we are. If part of who we are, at least, if we accept the idea that we have a reptilian brain, we need to accept the fact that having a certain set of hormones and genitals is informed by millions of years of evolution, and you cannot just turn that off with a culture that is whatever 100 years old, right?
Yeah.
So by bridging the two and by kind of removing myself from the ideological discourses that felt compelling at some point of my life, then you can really come into a sober analysis of what your views are in terms of what it means to be a man in general and what it means to be a man to you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a powerful thing because, the ability to look inward, you just mentioned, like, very vulnerably, like, hey, I'm, driven to, I how did you say it? Validation of women,
Finding validation, to looking
right?
for validation for
Do
women.
you think that what you have put out there publicly was an extension of that? Do you think that because I could say that, yeah, like a lot of things that I put out in the past, not everything, but that present in that for me was this is going to get validation. I know what kind of buttons I want to hit right now to get the result that I want. Again, that wasn't the entire motivation, but I know that was present for me. Do you think that has been present for you in your life?
It was present, I would say, not consciously. I
Yeah.
think when you don't do, my main motivation when I started to talk about gender issues from the lens of women was really for my daughter.
Yeah.
That's really where it came from. So it came from a fatherhood lens of wanting to protect, right? But what was not necessarily put into consciousness at that moment was that there were also other things underneath
Mhm.
the words that I were saying that were not necessarily only motivated by that.
Yeah.
So that's why there are many things that I would say again. There are other things that I would not say.
Mhm.
And some of the things that I say is that, I started that conversation publicly for my daughter, but I am proudly telling you today that I am continuing for my son because I have I have different concerns for them.
Mhm.
But the concern that I have for my son is the one of uncertainty. It's a
Mhm.
very inspirational narrative around raising girls, especially in the Western world, where they can
Yeah.
be anything, can do anything, and we should not change that.
Mhm.
I think it's important that women have the freedom and the possibility to be themselves, right? Because especially we know that, including in the United States, there are very basic rights that are not necessarily guaranteed,
Mhm.
and I don't discount that. I think it's a very important part of the conversation. At the same time, raising a boy, my boy is 13, bro. It's a different
Yeah.
time to
Mhm.
be a
Yeah.
boy, where
Yeah.
there is a lot of voices for his attention that are
Mhm.
not coming from a good place,
Yeah.
and there are also a lot of voices who are telling him that there is something inherently wrong with being a boy.
Yeah.
So in between, where I've kind of reclaimed my kind of masculine energy, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm continuing for my son. I mean, for both of them, but I will make sure that the humanity of my son will
Yeah.
be kind of communicated, even though
Mhm.
he's a boy or a man.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a similar experience. I think I went pretty hard on um men in the past, where like I was really like, oh my, I mean, I never said at one point like, you know, I forget maybe exactly what I said, but I was quick to blame men for the problems facing society. Oh, it's the unconsciousness of men that have caused all the issues in society for the past however many thousands of years. And I was really hard on men. I was being hard, and because ultimately I was being hard on myself as a man and
Yeah.
looking into my own like inadequacies, my own like failures, all those kinds of things. And I think I over indexed there. I was throwing around phrases like toxic masculinity and all those things left and right, and life experiences. My kid, my kid's getting. I have a son, who's 12, close to the age of your son, and I've realized that I I was too hard on men, and I don't think that I was really listening to why some of these things were happening, what was under the surface of some of the issues facing men. And in the past couple of years, and it sounds maybe similar to you, like I've grown much more compassionate to what men have faced, the history of men, and how that plays a part. And coming back to this idea that, like, you said it yourself, like, we need everybody. Like, we need everybody to be like a part of these conversations. Like, when we need women to thrive and have the freedom and capability to be the best versions of themselves, and we also need that for men. Like, there is not not this zero sum game that is out there when it comes to compassion for one group of people, and it's so important. And I think I've had to kind of come back from that, from really going one way. So I resonate with that.
Well, what came to mind when you were sharing your experience? I think a lot of it comes from, and I can relate to it because we live in very liberal cities, is environment.
Mm-hmm.
When you are living in an environment with people with certain views, especially if they're close to you,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna want to belong. So at some point, there is a lot of the views that you're sharing that you're not necessarily going to examine
Mm-hmm.
because they make you belong to your historical group, and
Yeah.
that's just at the heart of at the core of every human being is the need to belong and to connect, right? So I think there's an element of that. So please give compassion to yourself, because
Yeah.
this is a very human thing to do. With that being said, yeah, inclusion means everyone. When you really look at gender issues without the ideological veil, when you remove that and you look at the facts, well, all around the world, men die longer, sicker, and earlier than women. That's
Mhm.
just a fact. So if you want to talk about systemic or systems that work for or against
Mhm.
women and men, the idea that the system works better for men,
Mhm.
from what I'm seeing from the vast majority of men, to me is a falsehood. And the issue is this: is that the cultural discourse right now is focused on two types of men: the most successful men and the most harmful men.
Mhm.
When you remove the narrative about those two groups, what do we hear about men? We don't necessarily hear about the rest, yet they represent 99% of the picture. So I'm not saying that we should not talk about those two categories of men, because they play a big part of the culture, right? And driving the
Mhm.
culture.
Yep.
But by doing so, if we only talk about those people or the behaviors of those people, in my view, we dehumanize the lived experiences of the vast majority of men. We keep their issues into a blind spot, essentially,
Yeah.
which has been done for generations. And this is the reason why, you know, boys and men who hurt everyone,
Mhm.
men included.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we've been kind of talking about the sons that we have. My kid asked me at one point, like, or I think it wasn't more of a question, more of a statement. It was like, "Hey, I feel like I'm being like punished, like being a guy for like being a boy, like at school. Like there's this real sense of that, and that was really, really eye opening for me.
Oh, it is.
And yeah, yeah, and it's really it's super problematic, right? And you have a lot of these young boys trying to figure out who they are in often systems and culture and narratives that stem from things that are so outside of their their childhood space, right? That enter into this world and divide and push them out. And that was a really eye opening experience for me. And um I feel like, yeah, there's this real need to bring people together in more ways. I think we probably even saw it like earlier this month in the election, and just the continuing growing like divide. And I see it also all the time, like online. There's so much content that like pits men and women against each other, right?
Yeah.
Husbands against wives and men against women, whether it's talking about like, marriage and carrying the emotional load, or dating and, oh my gosh, all men have the ick, and oh, women just want this. There's all this like pitting against each other. And it's really, I think, hurting like parts of our communities, societies, and it's even way into like kids, like preteens, like our sons.
Well, yeah, and luckily, thankfully, the group of the population that is starting to really wake up to that reality are mothers of boys.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
God, because if you say it, or
Mm-hmm.
if a mom of boys say it, the resonance is not, it's
Mm-hmm.
sad, but it's not going
Yeah.
to be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that that's where I see a lot of hope, because we need
Yeah.
to hold on to something, right? But there's a couple of things that you said that I want to touch on, which is, so first of all, social media. I personally remove myself from all platform except LinkedIn, because for two reasons. Number one, because I wanted to reclaim my mental clarity and making sure that what I wanted to say was really what I wanted to say and not informed by an algorithm would have kind of,
Right. Yeah.
primed me to say certain things. So that's why I removed Instagram and those things like that. And I keep LinkedIn because those issues, as you just pointed out, are very controversial issues. So people will come after you, especially if you care about them. They are not going to have good intentions. So as a rule, I don't block anyone because I want people to expose themselves. So I have no problem being ridiculed or anything like that. But you're gonna have to do it with your first name, your last name, your professional credential.
Yeah. I follow you on LinkedIn, man. I love the stuff you're putting out there, and sometimes I go for the comments. It's really, but you do such a fantastic job of being invitational. Like I feel like that's one thing about you that's I feel your warmth, compassion, in what you're talking about. It's really, really good. So.
Well, I do that, but I also do that from a place of, I try to also maintain this almost masculine boundary of, I'm not gonna be mean. I'm not gonna be nice. You know what I mean?
Right.
There is a difference between being stern or being, what can I say? I'm trying to be factual. I'm trying to be compassionate, but I am not going to overly water down what I have to say just because it doesn't seem palatable to you. Right. If you have an issue with what I say, it's a you issue. It's not a my issue. And the response that comes from as a result of it, for example, one of the when I bring up some concept, people are mad at me. So one of them is when I question the male privilege concept for the reason that I described before. It's not that it's not accurate from a historical or even systemic, perspective.
Yeah, it's present there. There are pieces of it. Sure.
Of course, if you go running at night at 10 o'clock in Manhattan or in Brooklyn, if you're a guy, you're going to have a very different experience than if you're a woman. No question about that. And it's an extremely misleading view when you're trying to describe the lived experiences of the vast majority of men. And though if you do not accept that, you are lying to yourself. Essentially. And that's what I'm trying to, that nuance that is so unpopular nowadays, because when you are trying to bring people together, you used to be rewarded for it. Now both sides hate you, especially if they are in the extreme side of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
So you almost, that's what I say. I say, if you try to frame nuances as bigotry, to me, this is just ideological intimidation. You're just trying to pull me on your side and shame me if I don't comply. And I'm not going to do that. I'm just not.
It's such a, I think we've been programmed to just want these extremes. It's one or the other. And trying to come to a space where you're holding multiple things at one time, like you said, talking about male privilege. I think for the past couple of years or so, it's been just kind of this sweeping generalization, but actually, as you're saying, the conversation needs to be more nuanced. We need to be able to hold multiple truths at once. And I think the training of our brains through social media and all these other things is fighting against that. And we need to be able to reclaim it, especially if we're going to have these conversations that are prickly, personal. Right, we bring a lot of experiences to the table, and to have those conversations, we have to be able to hold multiple truths.
Yeah,
at the same time.
I call that integrated thinking personally. This is something that I'm trying to also to develop so people can have some kind of framing to use that.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, the entire world is kind of moving into a direction that does not promote that. As you were saying, you have the algorithm that kind of reinforce your bias to
Mm-hmm.
keep you stuck in an echo chamber. You're forced to react quickly because
Mm-hmm.
that's what
Yeah.
is what you're compelled to do. Even in dating apps, you swipe left or you swipe right. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
always compelled to pick a side, and that's not how you create bridges, unfortunately.
Oh, that's great stuff, Ludo. Thanks so much for popping in here. I feel like there's more that I want to talk to you about. Maybe I'll have you back on soon. I know you do a lot of work around just male allyship, especially in the workplace, and the stuff that you've talked about on LinkedIn, and how these issues um, impact our professional work environments. Maybe we'll get you back on to talk about that sometime. But I just want to say thanks. Thanks. I know, again, I met you early on, and I feel like we've been on very, very similar journeys over the course of the past, almost decade.
Yeah,
And so I thank you for sitting down and chatting today, man.
it was a pleasure. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Absolutely. All right, but we'll talk soon. Really quickly, before we sign off, where can people find you? I know you've gotten off of some of the popular social platforms like LinkedIn and X, but you're on LinkedIn. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my platform of choice for the moment. So if you type in Ludo, Ludo Gabriele, Gabriele, you will find me. I post daily content on LinkedIn, so you'll see something new every day.
It's
Hopefully
good.
you like it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Ludo, thanks again, man. Be well.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.